When you see someone from Goldman Sachs stepping down as, senior managing partner saying, well, I'm going to give back by going and working for a charity. That's like, well, mate, you probably don't know what it takes. It's a different skill set, right? It's not as hierarchical. Because of this, you don't have the same degree of accountability. You have an active staff who are deeply committed to issues and very vocal. Power is a lot more diffuse. So it takes a different skill set.
I'm Patrick J. McGinnis, and I coined the term FOMO. That's short for fear of missing out, and it's why some people end up following the crowd when they should be blazing a trail of their own. But if you want to achieve greatness in business and life, you've got to break free. Come on, I'll show you how. This is FOMO Sapiens, where we explore how entrepreneurial thinkers find the inspiration and the courage to build exceptional lives. Welcome back to FOMO Sapiens, the show for entrepreneurial thinkers. I'm your host, Patrick J. McGinnis, and today we're talking to Nick Grono, author of the new book, How to Lead Nonprofits. Now, Nick was appointed as the inaugural CEO of the Freedom Fund in January 2014. The fund is an ambitious effort to mobilize the knowledge, capital, and will needed to end modern slavery. It was launched by President Bill Clinton in New York, and its first 9 years of operation worked with some 140 frontline partners around the world to directly liberate over 30,000 people from modern slavery and return over 153,000 at-risk children back to school. Wow, that is an incredible impact. Welcome to FOMO Sapiens, Nick.
Hi, Patrick. Great to be here.
It's great to be with you. I mean, it's just a fascinating topic and one that we haven't done too much on the show, so I'm glad to have you. We will get into all of that, but first, as you know, I like to start every episode with the same question, and so I will ask you this question to start. Tell me something unexpected you learned about yourself that changed everything.
So when I was 16, I kind of had an experience that gave me a much deeper understanding of my ability to be disciplined and driven. And the story here was that I had an unusual upbringing. I spent 3 years growing up on a 100-year-old sailing ship, sailing around the world. My dad was the captain, my mum was a crew member, my younger brother, and there were 30 paying crew members. And we sailed this old boat, it's like the old pirate ships of old, from England to Australia, stopping off at pretty well every island on the way, all through the Caribbean, Panama, Galapagos, Easter Island. When we got to Fiji, and the boat was chartered for a movie with Tommy Lee Jones, and this is back in the early 80s, so he wasn't that well known. And we had this amazing experience because my brother and I got to work as extras and running boats, and we were paid. I mean, we would have done this for free, but, just kind of running loose on a film set at the age of 16. And then it all kind of went wrong about halfway through because we got a letter from the education department in Australia. And I'd been doing schooling. My brother had dropped out, and remote schooling. And they said, look, Nick, there's 12 weeks of schooling left that you have to complete, and there's only a month to go. And if you don't do these 12 weeks, you'll fail a year. So I immediately decided, well, I'm going to fail a year, right? One, I don't want to do it. And two, I don't think I can do it. And my parents had different ideas, and it was like, no, you're gonna have a shot at this, and you can't work on the film. So I thought this was a bit unfair, but deep down I knew actually I wanted to pass the year. I had ambitions. So my brother was still working on the film set because he'd dropped out of schooling, and I buckled down every day for 30 days straight, working 10 hours to churn through 3 months worth of schoolwork. And I did it, and I scraped through the year. But the reflection is, I learned from that I could be disciplined and I could really apply myself. And when I went back to school, that helped because I still had a huge amount to catch up on. When I went to university and law school, it helped even more. Everyone else is kind of struggling with the freedom that they have and ability to kind of be focused, and helps writing a book, helps with a lot of things. So I kind of learned that lesson fairly early on.
I was just thinking, it's exactly my experience writing a book. You had that deadline, and I just said, okay, I'm going to do this in 6 weeks, and I just did it. And yeah, of course, there's edits and stuff after, but just getting that first draft out in 6 weeks, setting yourself that deadline, which seems impossible. And like you hear people spend like 5 years writing a book, and I was sort of like, I'm not going to do that. And once you learn that you can do that, it's a ton of work. But you have to kind of create the conditions for it. And if you do that, then you do have that new superpower. So I've never missed a deadline, knock on wood, in my life because I have confidence in myself that I can just get things done.
Yeah. Well, and so for me, it was an understanding I could just focus and be disciplined and, set myself a task and work away at it. And, lots of us learn that through life. It was just that was quite a stark kind of demonstration to me of something I had to get done and could, kind of thought maybe I couldn't do it and proved to be able to do it. So yeah, that's always been helpful.
All right. So let's get into the topic today. How to lead nonprofits. I mean, you would think that this book has been written before, but yet I can't think of a book that really takes us on. I mean, it's a hot topic, but yet there's still, I would say, a lack of knowledge and expertise around this. So, even the fact that you could get the title is kind of amazing. How did you end up writing this book? Like, what called you to write this book?
Yeah, I can see you've written books before because, for me, I was stunned when I could just get that title.
Shocking.
Because I just thought it's such an obvious title.
Yeah.
And what it reflects is the fact that people haven't written about the practicalities of non-profit leadership. There are thousands upon thousands of books on business leadership, right? And there are academic texts on non-profit leadership. And it's quite remarkable. I mean, there's over 1.5 million non-profits in the US, right? That employing tens and tens of millions of people, and yet very little kind of work on this. So I've worked in nonprofits for 20 years. Before that, I was a corporate lawyer. I worked at Goldman Sachs. I was chief of staff to the Australian Attorney General, and then started working 20 years ago in a nonprofit space for an international organization working on conflict around the world. And I was quite struck by the differences from coming from the commercial world and the government world to the nonprofit world, right? I mean, impact is pretty clear if you're running a corporate organization. It's going to be your financial returns, right? You might have other kind of things you want to achieve, but generally it's going to be, what are my financial returns? Whereas for a nonprofit, it's change. That's really, really hard to measure, right? For us, we work on modern slavery, but what if you're working on hunger or poverty or in the arts? And because it's so hard to measure, you don't get necessarily the level of accountability and discipline that you get in the corporate world. Right? Because there isn't a bottom line. There isn't a measurable bottom line. And so you have to find other ways of driving the organization forward, driving accountability, motivating staff, building culture. And I think that's the big difference between the corporate world and the not-for-profit world.
The conventional wisdom, like if you were to walk into Goldman Sachs today, and not everybody, but I bet if you asked a bunch of people like, okay, do you think nonprofits are well run? They would probably say, not really, not rigorous. You can't get the good people because you're not paying the big bucks, those kinds of stereotypes around nonprofits. But we all know of examples of really fine organizations that do get amazing people and are able to have huge impact. So like what is true and what is not true about that conventional wisdom?
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and you've asked a question that kind of gets me fired up because the reality is there are well-run businesses and there are badly run businesses. And, we might all have views on Twitter and X or Boeing or any organization about how well they're being run, right?
How much time do you have?
Yeah, exactly. So, and there are well-run charities and badly run charities. And another kind of pet peeve of mine is when you see someone from Goldman Sachs stepping down as, senior managing partner saying, well, I'm going to give back by going and working for a charity.
Yeah.
That's like, well, mate, you probably don't know what it takes. It's a different skill set, right? It's not as hierarchical. Because of this, you don't have the same degree of accountability. You have an active staff who are deeply committed to issues and very vocal. Power is a lot more diffuse. So it takes a different skill set. Yet we are working on some of the most important issues of our time. Climate change, right? Conflict, disinformation, right? And the leaders in all this space are non-profits that are fighting the fight and raising awareness and driving action. So I think it's critically important. They are very different, right? And a big challenge is that the pay is significantly less at non-profits. On the other hand, what you do have, which is a really powerful motivation, is intrinsic motivation. You are working to change the world. And if you look at surveys about motivation at corporates, staff there desperately want purpose. They want purpose. They want to believe that their work is contributing to change. And so at a nonprofit, you're never worried about purpose because you're always working towards positive change. You may not do it as well as you can query about how well you're doing it, but motivation is there in spades. We are working to end modern slavery. There are 50 million people in slavery today. This is kids, girls that are trafficked into sex work, boys that are first forced to work in factories, kids you hear about working to produce our mobile phones or our fast fashion, all of these things. It's a powerful motivating cause. To know every day that our work is making a difference is something that gets me out of bed every single day. I never worry about whether or not my job has meaning. I worry about whether I'm doing it as well as I could. I'm worried about, can we do better? Can we mobilize the resources we need? But I never worry about, is this really important work?
FOMO. How do you, as I listen to that, I think about the impact and the purpose, because you talk about the purpose is fundamental to leadership in nonprofits. That's kind of central to your message. But, it's one thing to be the employee who's out there on the front lines in the field, seeing the child who was liberated from modern slavery and is back in school. It's another thing to be the person in the head office who doesn't get to go to those places. Like, how do you get everybody fired up with the purpose when, people may not be touching the impact in the same sorts of ways?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I as a leader, I spend a lot of time focused on culture.
Yeah.
Right? How do we build a culture that has everyone aligned towards this purpose? And we do try and make sure that everyone gets to understand it firsthand. We try and make sure that most staff get out to our program countries. We bring people from countries into the office so that everyone is understanding. Because for us, what we do, our model, is basically to raise funds and then get the resources to the frontline grassroots organizations that are going to make the biggest difference. So we fund over 140 frontline grassroots anti-slavery organizations in countries like Kenya and Ethiopia and Brazil, where they make a huge difference. And there are ways to connect with that work, and it's really important because that provides intrinsic motivation that gets organizations, everyone fired up in the organization. What's harder, I reflect on this from my own personality. This work can be really tough because I was in Ethiopia last month, and you go and you see the issues firsthand, and you see a lot of the suffering and, people who have experienced horrific things, and then you fly out again, right? And the problem's still there. And so sometimes, even though you've got this powerful purpose, you're wondering, am I making enough of a difference? Are we doing enough? Am I just a tourist in all of this kind of work? I'm flying in, I'm flying out.
Yeah.
So you have to constantly kind of think about how you look after yourself and how you make a difference.
Yeah, it is true what you say. It's sort of like you go to the place and you experience, and then you go back home where you're living in privilege, as it were, and that can be really hard to manage. But the impact is still there. Now, I just want to step back a second before we get into the challenges and some of the lessons in the book. Which is, as we're talking, I was just thinking, I never really thought about this before. Like, what's the point of a nonprofit? And I'm going to tell you what I think it is, and then you can correct me. But to me, the point of a nonprofit, there's many probably, but the one that I see is that you need, it's an organization that is addressing something that is not being addressed by other players, whether it's government, whether it's for-profit. But more and more, as you were talking about the work that you do, I was thinking it's interesting how nonprofit in many times will be there to counteract the damage caused by for-profit. I never thought about that before. I was this many years old before I realized that. You're talking about ending modern slavery. Well, a lot of the examples you gave were companies that are exploiting people. And so the nonprofit has to come in and fight against the for-profit, which is why it's so important that nonprofits be well run, because they're competing head to head with organizations that oftentimes have way more in the terms of resources and ability to pay and all that sort of stuff. So that's my sort of, as I think about why this is so important and why we need folks to understand the stakes here, that's what jumps to mind. What's your read on that?
Yeah, even as you're asking that question, I'm thinking there is such a bigger philosophical piece there because, fundamentally nonprofits exist because there isn't an earned income business model. I can't make money helping the poorest people in the world, the most exploited people in the world come out of slavery. There isn't a business model there. So we rely on people to give us money, funding, and then we can drive change. And then a big piece of our work, this is getting to the first part of your question, is about forced labor and supply chains. As I said, fast fashion, right? We were working in India for many years where Often there's high levels of exploitation of kids in cotton mills, and we're working in Thailand where there's forced labor of migrants coming from Myanmar and from Cambodia and forced onto fishing boats, often for weeks or months on end, pumped full of amphetamines, working horrendous hours, earning nothing. If they get sick, it's often cheaper to throw them over the side than to bring them back to port to produce seafood that ends up on our supermarket shelves. Now, it's not that companies in America that sell frozen seafood from Thailand are deliberately engaged in exploitation, but they are closing their eyes to the fact that if you want really, really, really cheap seafood, then the cheapest way to produce it is to strip out the labor cost, right, which is to pay someone nothing, which means you have to force them to work. And because you're not looking three levels down your supply chain, you just close your eyes to it and say it's not our responsibility because we have a policy against forced labor. But the reality is, it happens because there is no other way that you can produce seafood at that cost. And so our job is to change that equation, to push for accountability, right? To raise awareness, we support strategic litigation where necessary, but foremost supporting those vulnerable communities so that they can advocate for themselves, so that they get a decent wage. It's not that they shouldn't be doing the work, but it's that they get paid for their work. Right? It's fair and decent wage. It's not a really difficult concept to grasp. So yeah, it's where the model doesn't work.
I mean, when you think about it that way, it's just the stories that aren't being told. Like I certainly was not aware of that. But it's shocking, and it is, clearly wrong. Let's talk about some of the lessons in the book. I'd love it if we could start, with an example. I'd love to hear a story from the book that highlights in your mind what it looks like when leadership is working at a nonprofit.
So, I talk a lot about culture. And let's talk about COVID. And
do we really have to? I don't think that's nice at all, but it's fine. I sort of remember it. It's like hazy.
It's bizarre how hazy it is, and how quickly we can just kind of push it in that background.
Survival mechanism, my friend.
But I do remember very distinctly when lockdowns were about to happen. So I was in the UK.
Okay.
This is where I'm based, and most of our staff are. And COVID's about to hit, and we're going to close down. And it's a time of tremendous uncertainty, right? In many, many ways. First and foremost, I knew that demand for our work was going to rocket, right? It was tough enough. You remember how bad it was getting access to tests and, let alone.
I do.
Well, imagine if you are in the slums in India or if you are in rural Ethiopia and this is hitting and people are dying, right? And we had staff members, our staff members in countries where we're working, all of them had friends or family who died in COVID. And we're working in environments where people were dying at a significant level. I mean, if you can't afford basic kind of sanitary care and soap and all the rest of it, then you really are going to suffer when COVID hits. And so we had a lot of things going on. One was like, it's going to get far, far worse for those that we're here to serve. Second of all, right, we have to close down our offices, physical offices. We didn't know how that was going to work. Thirdly, I was worried, it could probably be a real funding crunch because those that fund us were also really worried about their businesses and all the rest of it. So there could be as demand was exploding, there could be a shortfall in funding. And so it was like, how do I manage this? And we sat down as a team and I kind of said to everyone, look, we're in a strong financial position. We're not going to be making layoffs. We may have to make some furloughs, right? But everyone will be paid. And what we need to do is we need to go out there and give the message that times are really tough and help is needed more than ever, and we can make a difference. And it was quite striking. Very quickly, we actually mobilized significantly more funding from our funders because they understood that times were tough. And the ability to lead into our purpose, right, which was to serve the most vulnerable, was both unifying for the organization because everyone was busy all of a sudden. We set up an emergency fund, right? So we mobilized an extra several $1 million that we could disperse immediately to get the basic essentials to very vulnerable population. So staff who might have otherwise been drifting, wondering what the hell's going on, everyone was focused. Everyone felt like we were making a real difference in these very difficult times, and we were able to help the partners that we exist to serve. So for me, it was a powerful lesson about leaning into purpose when times are really tough. Not just wringing your hands and saying, "What are we going to do? This is awful," right? And there were organizations that really struggled and couldn't because they were so wrapped up internally, and it was able to lean into a strong culture and kind of have a clear direction of travel that took us through that, and we came out stronger through 2 years of COVID than when we'd gone in.
FOMO. Yeah, your lesson there is such a good one for any type of leader, which is that when there's a lot of uncertainty and ambiguity, because I worked for AIG when it blew up and the government took it over, and the management team, I don't know what they were doing. I think they were hiding. Everyone was hiding under their desk, and now I look back, I have empathy for that because they didn't know what the heck to say. But in the vacuum of leadership, you know what happens to people? They go to lunch and complain the whole time. I mean, I was at the gym for like 4 hours a day. I was like, what's the point of being here? We might not be around in a month or two. And had there been a plan, even if that plan was uncertain, but just some sort of mission, esprit de corps, whatever, I'm quite certain that I would have signed up for it because I was looking for leadership. And so it's a really, really good point. I want to ask you one more question before we get to our lightning round, which is this. A lot of people on this who listen to this show, a lot of my FOMO Sapien friends are involved in nonprofits, maybe as a volunteer, maybe as a board member, maybe, as an employee, and I'm curious for people who are for the first time, let's say, engaging in nonprofit work, what is the most important thing or things that they can bring to the table to really make sure that they're contributing in a meaningful way and not, sort of negatively contributing to the organization?
Yeah, I think people, particularly people with business experience, have a huge amount to offer. So, leaving aside the response to the first question, I think it's understanding what you have to offer. For instance, on my board, we actively look for people with business and finance experience because they bring a discipline around numbers. And particularly where you struggle for accountability in the nonprofit world, it's really helpful to have someone kicking the tires and asking the questions, right? So people with business and finance experience are a huge asset if they want to join boards as treasurers and so on. And then there's a whole range of skills you can contribute. You have to just come with a degree of humility, right? And it's not that because you've worked in business, you know everything there is. Just like when I retire, I'm not going to offer up my services to, Fortune 100 companies on the basis that I am an expert leader and it translates to the business world. You have to understand there are different skill sets and where you can add value, but you have to look at the skills that you have and what you can add. Understand the organization, understand the cause and the mission. Right? There's so much you can do volunteering, as long as you understand that you don't have to be in a leadership role. And if you want to be in a leadership role, you have to prove yourself. Prove that you understand what purpose is, what impact is. You understand how you drive change, how you build a culture in an organization that is very, very different from a for-profit culture.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I was on the finance committee. I was a finance chair of the New York Youth Symphony, coming from a finance background. And what I learned was, number one, I was not running an investment bank. Like, you have to understand the organization and its various differences and what the priorities are, because it's like, you're not trying to optimize the bottom line per se. There's a lot of other factors and things that you may want to invest in, or you can't run like a massive surplus every year because then there's like all those things to think about. But number two, which was, I think, even more important, was you have to be ready to roll up your sleeves. Because oftentimes nonprofit organizations have great people, but they might be understaffed. They're running it lean, or people who haven't done things the way you've done them before, even if they're very competent. And so if you're just going to simply sit there like a managing director and tell people what to do without getting your hands in the work and collaborating, it's not going to be that productive. So and that's the joy of it all, is like getting your hands dirty, because you learn a ton and that makes you way more effective in your future roles. So it's a really important thing to keep in mind when you're getting involved.
And use your networks. Use your networks. I mean, every charity, every nonprofit is looking for funders or people to build relationships with. And that's one thing you should be bringing to the table.
Yes. And be honest. I also think, like, sometimes, so every nonprofit is going to ask you for money. And that's, by the way, that's good. They should be doing that. But if you don't have people, be honest about it. Like I used to feel a little shy. Like, well, I don't really know many billionaires. I'll just be like, listen, there's the 3 people I can ask. I have no idea. I will do my best. I don't mind. I will shoot my shot, but like, I'm not going to feel ashamed if I can't turn up a donor either.
No, you're absolutely right. Just be transparent about it all. But you'll probably find more people that can be of use in one way or another than you would ever have thought.
Totally. All right, let's do the lightning round now. Now I have 4 questions for you, Nick. And just, give me what you got. Number 1, what's a favorite quote?
Oh, you probably won't be surprised to hear this. Martin Luther King, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. It's all about optimism, right?
I love it. Nobody said that before. So it's a classic, but yet I'm glad you said it. Number 2, name a book or podcast every FOMO sapien should know about.
So there's a book I constantly turn to called Falling Upwards by Richard Rohr. I don't know if you know it. So he's a Jesuit priest philosopher.
Love it.
And it's about the 2 halves of life. First half, creating identity. Second half, if you're fortunate, about kind of giving meaning to that identity, often dependent on a fall, a tragedy that kind of enables you to move to the next stage of life. And it kind of draws on religion, but also on Greek philosophy. It's very, very readable.
Oh, that's good. I love a good Jesuit. I went to Georgetown, so it's
there you go.
It's my stuff. Number 3, what's one piece of advice you give to your younger self?
This is something I've had to kind of learn constantly, which is, the skills and behaviors that get you into leadership don't necessarily make you a good leader. Yeah.
You see that so many times, and that's why you need to ask for help and be self-aware.
And you need to learn to let go as a leader, which, I still have to work at.
It's really hard. It's true. Number 4, what's your most important memory?
All my most important memories are going to be about family. Birth of my first child, meeting my wife, getting married. So it's the kind of the things that really make life matter.
All right. The book is called How to Lead Nonprofits. If you want to find out more about Nick and his work, you can go to freedomfund.org. You can find Nick on Twitter. We don't call it X here, at Nick Grono, and on LinkedIn at Nick Grono. Nick Grono, author of How to Lead Nonprofits. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Patrick. Great to be here.
FOMO. If you like today's show, please be sure to rate it and recommend it to your friends. And as always, you can find me on Instagram at Patrick J. McGinnis, on Twitter at PJ McGinnis, and on the web at FOMOSapiens.com or PatrickMcGinnis.com, where you can get all kinds of free resources to live a more decisive and entrepreneurial life. FOMO Sapiens is recorded in New York City. Theme music is by Mike McGinnis, and editing and post-production is by Josh Elstro. If you like today's show, please be sure to rate it and recommend it to your friends. And as always, you can find me at FOMOSapiens.com and at PatrickMcGinnis.com. To advertise on FOMO Sapiens, reach out to contact@FOMOSapiens.com.